I would like to welcome all of you to our business breakfast, where we are talking all things climate change, as I said before. Just to contextualize something here, Valentine's is just around the corner. And I have a tip for any singles that may be in here. If you're going to go on a blind date, you should talk global warming because it helps to break the ice. My name is Robert Muganda, and if you don't know me, I'm the Chief Operations Officer for the Diplomat Business Networking Club. I'm also Project Coordinator. It is my pleasure to welcome you all this morning, and I hope that you're going to enjoy your breakfast and the discussions that we're going to have today. I would like to thank all of you for joining us on this special presentation on climate change, an issue that is becoming more and more critical every day. Today's theme is climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and value creation. It is a call to action to businesses in Zimbabwe to commit to net zero by 2050 and be part of a decarbonized global economy. As the project coordinator, I do not walk alone. Our secretariat is ably led by our Chief Executive Officer and Coordinator, Reginald Chapfunga, a man I have known for his dedication to mainstreaming diplomatic media in Zimbabwe for well over a decade. We also have our administrator, Noma Dube, who is the nucleus of our little office and who is responsible for getting all of you here. At this time, I would like to invite the Diplomat Business Networking Club chairperson, Mr. Arvind Nair, to come forward and begin our session. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can put your hands together for Mr. Arvind Nair.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to invite and say thank you very much for all the ambassadors and the excellencies who are here this morning to honor us. Thank you very much. Tatenda. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted that we are all meeting this morning with one clear objective, that of protecting the environment and taking bold climate action. These issues are no longer debatable, as popular American scientist Guy McPherson sums it. If you really think that the environment is less important than the economy, try holding your breath while you count your money. And we talk of Zim dollars and US dollars. A warm welcome to this breakfast meeting on climate change, and thank you for including this event in your busy Friday schedule. The aim of this breakfast session is to place the spotlight on the role the business can and should play in the fight to mainstream climate change. Our focus in shaping this session was on how we can harness synergies with special emphasis on Zimbabwe as a country in a situation. This finds resonance with what government development agencies, non-governmental organizations, and the international community are already engaged in to promote a more proactive participation of the business on the subject. Our theme, climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and value creation, stresses the importance of business supporting climate change related issues and having the necessary tools and information to play that role. Zimbabwe needs more green companies. We are really grateful to our speakers for responding to our call to serve as speakers and panelists. As we all look forward to the presentations, I'm confident that today's session will be as engaging and beneficial as the two previous ones we held in close collaboration with the Netherlands and the Turkish embassies. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. Our series of breakfast meetings are aimed at sharing knowledge and experiences, discovering opportunities and cementing collaborations. Today marks our first session for the year 2022, and I believe we could not have picked a better topic to kickstart our year. Let me then take this opportunity to encourage all of you here to take advantage and make use of this platform, which has been designed by the Diplomat Business Networking Club, DBNC, to facilitate dialogue in a cross-section of sectors. Whilst breakfast meetings are a regular feature of our calendar, they are only a part of the club's program. And events. 2022 will see us launch high-profile international events such as the Open Walls Embassy Day. This is an annual international exhibition where all embassies and development agencies in the country will exhibit and interact with Zimbabweans outside the embassy walls. The Diplomat Business Network Club is a high-profile social and business networking initiative that connects diplomats, senior business executives, policymakers, government officials, development agencies, private sector, media, and other key stakeholders in a diverse and multicultural atmosphere of positive dialogue. Goodwill and opportunity. It is a voluntary, non-profit, non-political, and independent club established in the December year 2020. The club promotes cultural and commercial diplomacy as the way of enhancing substantial development, strengthening relations, and promoting social culture cooperation. It also presents embassies represented in Zimbabwe any opportunity to further the country's public diplomacy and public affairs. Membership into this club is strictly by invitation, and I like to stress that, strictly by invitation. Either by the board, secretariat, or full members only. Qualifying members are drawn from the diplomatic community, senior business executives, NGOs, expatriates, IGOs, UN missions, corporates, government institutions, and the creative sector. I will take this opportunity to invite everybody in this room who is not our member to join the club. Thank you very much. Tatenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nair. Mr. Nair leads a 7-member DBNC board, which is strong in terms of purpose, diversity, focus, talent, and emotional strength. Allow me to recognize some of our board members that are here present. We have Ms. Anora Sbanda, who is our club's finance secretary, and Mr. Amio Matindike, who is the vice chairperson of the board. We also have Mr. Chaka Bosha, who is on the media committee for the board. Introduced in July 2021, the Diplomat Business Networking Club has been on a steady membership growth trajectory. And as you heard from our chairperson, the invitation for membership is open. We have our membership forms up front. Noma is ready to take your memberships as we go forward. To date, the club has now signed up members from the diplomatic community, government departments, UN missions, non-governmental organizations, senior business executives, and influential members of the society. Membership into the club is strictly by invitation by either board, secretariat, or full members. It is by now, if you're now a member, you'll be able to identify the people mentioned above for your invitation and recommendation. As you may have picked from the chairperson's presentation, the club is a unique platform for decision makers, influential members of society to share knowledge and experience and discover opportunities and cement collaborations. Your participation in today's business breakfast allows for all of this to happen and for the sharing of knowledge and very important topics that affect all aspects of life in different manners. Today we are discussing climate change. I like to spend a lot of time on social media, and I noticed one local female celebrity recently posted on her Instagram that the planet is getting hotter than her imaginary boyfriend. This shows that the subject of climate change touches us in very different ways. I don't know if amongst the floor we have people who may have questions about taking up membership in the business club. If we have anyone who has a question, we have a few frequently asked questions that we have received. If there is no one who will be asking, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge Access Solutions, with whom this breakfast would not have been possible. Access Solutions is the brainchild of the DBNC Vice Chairperson, Mr. Emio Matindile. Access Solutions is the brainchild of our Vice Chairperson, Mr. Emio Matindile, and they pride themselves as a leading IT solutions firm in Zimbabwe. To get our event running, we've had partnerships also with the United Nations, who have been very instrumental in shaping some of the discussions that we're going to be listening to today. Ladies and gentlemen, after that little short breather, it's my pleasure to welcome our next speaker. Please help me welcome His Excellency, the Ambassador of Rwanda to Zimbabwe, Ambassador James Musoni, who's here to share the Rwandan experience on climate change. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Moderator. Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished leaders of Diplomat Business Networking Club, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to be here this morning to discuss on this very important topic on the climate change. Climate change can no longer be ignored. According to various studies, almost every country in the world is very vulnerable, and therefore need for proper coordination and collaboration. For example, from 1900 to up to recent, like 2017, if you look at a country like this, here in Zimbabwe, adverse climate has caused 7 drought events, 22 epidemic episodes, 12 floods, and 5 storms, which resulted in total deaths of 7,000 people and total damage estimates of 950 million USD, notwithstanding the destruction caused by the tropical cyclone Dai in 2019. And in my country, Rwanda, in 2008, we had two aspects which occurred within hours of one another, magnitudes of 6.1 and 5, killing nearly 40 people and destroyed over 1,000 homes. And this can be found in almost every country. The commonality of these problems opens up broader scope for collaboration and starting with this kind of network. Rwanda is very committed to partnering with the rest of the world to deal with this problem. Rwanda has presented national determined contribution policies, part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and Rwanda has ratified the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocols. Now, the mitigation efforts our government has been trying to put in place. We have a ministry in charge of environment, which is responsible for designing and monitoring the national climate policies. And we have the specific fund put in place to do with green programs. It's called the Green Fund. This Green Fund has been established since 2014 to finance and support green development initiatives. And in 2020, in May, Rwanda was the first African country to submit its updated national determined contribution and has committed to a greenhouse gas emission reduction of 38% by 2030. Green growth and climate resilience strategy was also adopted in 2011 with the goal of Rwanda becoming one of the low carbon economies by 2030. For example, in form of the mitigation, in every district now there is a demarcated irrigation area. Make sure that farmers are able to cope with the changing weather. In the adaptation and value creation, we also have the national forestry policy, and this Rwanda National Forest Policy won the World Future Council's Future Policy Award as the world's most inspiring and innovative forest policy, and through the Global Bond Challenge. Rwanda has added to the existing forest area by about 2 million more hectares of forest. And through the Green Fund, the government has embarked on the development of a green city in our capital city. This green city project is a model community in about 600 hectares, and it's estimated to accommodate about 170,000 households. So the project has started and is being funded by this Green Fund. And on the value creation opportunities, these are mainly in the solar energy, where quite a number of rural communities are powered by PV mini-grids, and we expect to have more of value creation opportunities in this area. Mr. Moderator, in conclusion, I would say that let me first take this opportunity to thank Diplomat Business Networking Club for putting in place this kind of network where important global challenges like on climate change are discussed, and through these discussions we expect to have more understanding and more collaborative efforts, and therefore working together we feel we could deal with this very challenging problem. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome our next speaker to the podium, the Australian Ambassador to Zimbabwe, Her Excellency Ms. Bronte Moores. The floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. To Mr. Arvin Nair and the board, congratulations on this wonderful initiative, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of it, part of the discussions this morning on such an important topic. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to cover a couple of broad areas under the heading of climate change this morning. Firstly, I'll give a brief outline of Australia's climate change policies and what we're doing nationally and internationally. And then I'm going to try to give some hopefully interesting practical examples of what, from a business and development perspective, of what we're doing. Firstly, Australia is, of course, a very committed party to the Paris Agreement, which everyone knows came into force in 2016. A few key points under our nationally determined contributions, which my colleague, the Rwanda ambassador, just mentioned. The NDCs are very important, and some key aspects of our nationally determined contributions are: we're committed to net zero emissions by 2050. We have an active plan in place for a low emissions technology plan. And then in the interim, we've reaffirmed our commitment to reduce our emissions by 28% below 2005 levels by 2030, and we're on track to exceed this. Our whole climate change strategy is very much a science-based and technology-focused approach. It's all about facilitating the conditions for innovators, for scientists and entrepreneurs to chart the path to net zero globally. What we really want to do is help drive down the costs of adaptive technologies and allow them to be adopted and scaled up for people, obviously in Australia, but across the world. Clean technology has to outcompete existing technology, make it accessible for everyone, everywhere, and that's at the core of what we're trying to do. So we have a comprehensive plan, obviously, to reduce domestic emissions, and we will achieve, we're confident we will achieve net zero emissions by 2050 in a practical and responsible way that will take advantage of all the new economic opportunities that are emerging while serving also our traditional market. Our technology investment roadmap is the cornerstone of the plan, and it's all about prioritising technology that will cut emissions but also create jobs and grow our economy. These are obviously the challenges that we're all facing. So we're driving down the cost of low emissions technology. We're deploying these at scale. We're helping our regional industries within Australia and communities to seize opportunities. And we're working with other countries on the technologies needed to decarbonise the world's economy. Some of the highlights of our progress to date: we've reduced our emissions by nearly 21% on 2005 levels. And our most recent projections show we'll cut our emissions already by 2030 by 35%, which is well above our targets. The share of generation from wind and solar in Australia is already 18%. The global average is about 6.5%, OECD about 11%. And half of our electricity will come from renewable sources by 2030. We've got a large project called Snowy 2.0, which is a big renewable energy project. And it will provide also vital storage in our national energy market. We've invested significant amounts, about $3.5 billion, in a national water grid to build water infrastructure to strengthen drought resilience, obviously of great interest in many African countries, and about $1.1 billion in a national land care program to drive sustainable agriculture and environmental outcomes. And these issues around dealing with drought and agricultural resilience are obviously, I'll come to shortly, areas that we're very keen to continue working with Africa on. At the last year's COP26 conference, we increased our climate finance for this current 5-year period to $2 billion to support mitigation and adaptation efforts in vulnerable countries, and this is a big increase on our previous commitments. Globally too, we're very aware that our shared economic prosperity is dependent on all of us transitioning to clean energy and a clean energy global economy. So we're very committed to this at home and internationally. There's a couple of areas of our cooperation, specific cooperation globally, that we're working to support African countries. One is through the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. This is our research centre where scientists are encouraged to work for the benefit of partner countries, because we always find these collaborative processes help contribute to solutions to our own agricultural challenges. And we've had a terrific project in Zimbabwe over recent years called the Tools Plus Agriculture Innovations Platform Program, and it's combining technical and institutional change methods to increase irrigation water productivity and profitability in smaller irrigation schemes among farmers in Africa. It's had really positive synergies, and it's also helped to reinvigorate some failing irrigation schemes through some great collaborations. And we've had really good work, the Australian scientists with their Zimbabwean counterparts in ICRISA, their scientific research organisation in Bulawayo. We also, last year, I had the pleasure of launching an ACR-led research effort all about increasing food security and food loss in Malawi and Zambia, neighbouring countries, which is an interesting one because the amount of food wastage, even in developing countries, is really significant, and looking into why and how this happens and how we can redress it is really important and clearly has an environmental impact. So that's a really interesting project that's underway. Another project that we're sponsoring is called Digital Earth Africa. We haven't done so much in Zimbabwe yet, but we've done it in neighbouring countries and we're hoping to do more here. It's basically a free platform. I emphasise that. This is a free platform for accessing satellite imagery specific to the African context. So whether it's weather patterns or land issues, there's a massive amount of satellite imagery, a massive amount of data which is put into an analysis-ready format to provide insights into land and water resources. The portal provides access for anyone to visualise and analyse the data, and it provides really the technical users with really useful programming information to inform policy making. We also work with our wonderful partners in the UN in various ways on climate change issues, the multilateral development banks. We've worked through the Global Forest Observation Initiative and provided support to that. We're also a long-standing supporter of the Global Environment Facility, and we're contributing in the current 5-year period about $80 million there. We're also, through multilateral means, also providing, as an illustration, about $4 million to help use traditional Australian fire management practice in Botswana. Australia is one of the driest inhabited continents in the world, and it has some rich biodiversity, so we're really interested in working and partnering with African countries who have some similar challenges. On the business side, I think there's some really interesting opportunities for commercial and technological links between Australia and African countries, particularly in clean energy and critical minerals. There's strong interest from Australian companies in the development of green hydrogen in Africa, and there's a few companies looking actively in that area at the moment. Also investing in wind projects in Africa, including one company called WindLab, which is a commercial spin-off of our government scientific agency, which has a number of wind farm investments already in South Africa. There's various companies already and innovative social enterprises working to improve clean energy. There's Okra Solar, an Australian-based technology developer, which is helping setting up microgrids in communities, particularly in Nigeria. In Malawi, there's an NGO Empower setting up energy hubs to provide energy access in rural communities, providing the pay-as-you-go access to services systems. And there's several other companies, including AgSol, which is developing solar-powered agricultural equipment, and Benville, which is working in Malawi and Kenya, selling solar products to households, but targeting the poorest households, which are off-grid. So particularly catering to their needs. We also have an Australian NGO cooperation program, which is doing some great work with counterpart NGOs in Africa on a whole range of terrific projects across many areas, but several of them particularly focused on environment and conservation. Through our small grants program at the Embassy, at the very practical level, like many embassies, we have a small grants program, and quite a few of our projects are very focused on climate change and adaptability. One of the groups we've supported for quite a while is the Save the African Rhino Foundation, which is headquartered in Perth. It's the largest serving specialist rhino conservation fundraiser in the world. And I mention it partly because its head, Nicholas Duncan, who was a co-founder of the organisation, was recently awarded one of the highest awards in Australia, called the Order of Australia, in the January Honours list. He has raised over $10 million for conservation of the rhinos in Zimbabwe, working in the Sale Valley Conservancy, and he's given more than $3 million personally. So it's actually been a really critical part of this biodiversity conservation drive in Zimbabwe. And in a similar part of Zimbabwe, a fairly new organisation called the Rangelands Restoration Trust, which the Embassy is also supporting, is working to restore ecosystems and partner with people who depend on the ecosystems to improve their livelihoods. It's quite a holistic approach, and it's about building resilient ecosystems, creating sustainable economic opportunities, and re-establishing wildlife migration corridors. They're quite a complex, innovative approach. For those of you who know anything about rugby, the Rangelands Restoration Trust was founded by David Pocock, who grew up in Bulawayo, but quite a well-known rugby player, played for Australia, is back here now, wanting to contribute directly to the preservation of his homeland in this wonderful way. We also, through our public diplomacy, have supported another really terrific social enterprise, one run by a very innovative Australian. It's called Mobility for Africa. It's a solar-powered tricycle project, which originally was targeting just rural women, helping women get their product to market through community charging centres for solar-powered tricycles. They've done some fantastic pilot projects in Webster. They're working now in Shimani Mani and Dombashawa. The dairy board's interested. The egg cooperatives are interested because this is a really simple, effective means of aggregating agricultural product through these very robust solar-powered tricycles. They were actually invited to exhibit at Expo 20. It's called Expo 2020, but it's actually going on now, as people know, in Dubai. And they're exhibiting there, and I think they really do Zimbabwe proud. We're also at the moment partnering with the Australian National University to run some short courses on climate change adaptation in Africa, and we're in touch with the relevant ministries here and government departments here to get people onto these courses, specifically on grid integration of renewable energy in Africa and adaptation. So we hope that will be of really practical value for our bilateral cooperation in these areas. So they're just some of the broad policy settings, as I said, which is very technology focused. I think that's what we're really all about. It's getting the technology and sharing the technology, finding the practical solutions that we can share globally, because obviously climate change, we all recognise it's not something that individual countries can solve. There's no point tackling it just in your own country. It's something that we're working on collectively. So that's why we're really delighted to have the various partnerships we have in Zimbabwe, in this part of the world, to work on it. And I guess at the core of that is networking too, which is why I'd just like to thank you again for this opportunity. It's wonderful. It's so vital for us to network on these issues, but also it's a delight to be able to network in person after a break for the last couple of months. So thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for highlighting the possibilities that innovations provide in the fight against climate change, from rugby to tricycles to networking in environments like this. Thank you very much. Before I call upon our next speaker, I would like you to join me in appreciating Exo Solutions once again. They have made this breakfast a possibility. If we could all just clap for Exo. We are also working in partnership with the United Nations, so if we could clap for the United Nations. Our next speaker, Dr. Patrice Takukam, I hope I got the pronunciation correct, is with the Food and Agriculture Organization, and he is the sub-regional coordinator covering Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and Eswatini. Can we please welcome him to the podium?
Thank you, moderator, and good morning, everyone. Excellencies, ambassadors, colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to convey our gratitude to Mr. Harvin Meyer, the chairperson of the Diplomat Business Networking Club, for inviting us this morning. Here talking on behalf of the United Nations system in Zimbabwe, so it's really an honor for me to talk on behalf of my colleagues. So this gives me great pleasure to join you this morning to share perspective and experiences on one of the most pressing challenges that the humankind is facing, climate change. So therefore, the discussions this morning about how we mitigate the risk associated with the climate change while adapting our production and consumption systems, making them more resilient to these realities, and identifying associated investment opportunities are of great importance. So we really thank the network for inviting us and also the private sector to these discussions. We always think that it is important to strengthen the partnership, public-private partnership, because these are the solutions to most of the issues, the problems the world is facing. We know that increased climate variability is affecting negatively on Africa's agricultural production systems, with prolonged periods of drought and more floods experienced in some countries in recent years, including Zimbabwe and Southern Africa. Indeed, Zimbabwe and several countries in this region have first-hand experience of the negative consequences of this global phenomenon. So what is the overview of the climate change in the region and Zimbabwe? The sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, indicates that climate change is affecting every region of the world, from drought, extreme heat, increase of the frequency of rainfall, increase in the frequency of forest fires, effect of oxygen concentrations in the oceans and water scarcity, etc. The 26th UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, held in November last year, once again highlighted the severity of the climate crisis that the world is grappling with. It is well known that agri-food systems are particularly impacted negatively, while at the same time contributing to greenhouse gas emissions equivalent to about 1/3 of the total global emissions. African countries are especially prone to the impact of climate change, as their economies are heavily dependent on agriculture. For example, Zimbabwe lies in a semi-arid region with limited and unreliable rainfall patterns and temperature variations. Rainfall exhibits considerable spatial and temporal variability characterized by shifts in the onset of rains, increases in the proportion of low rainfall years, decreases in low intensity rainfall events, as well as increases in the frequency and intensity of mid-season dry spells. So all of these effects have an important impact on the agriculture, on the productions, and in consequence in the food security of the population. Extreme weather events, namely tropical cyclones and drought, have also increased in frequency and intensity. Moreover, according to the Zimbabwe Meteorological Service, daily minimum temperatures have risen by approximately 2.6 degrees over the last century, while daily maximum temperatures have risen by 2 degrees over the same period. Overall, the climate in Zimbabwe is regionally differentiated, but is generally becoming warmer with more erratic rainfall patterns. Climate changes, extreme heat, erratic rains have been drivers of loss of productivity, increased poverty, malnutrition, and vulnerabilities. There is a need, therefore, for scaling up of initiative and investment in agriculture, forestry, and land use sectors to address climate change. New and innovative ways, as the Ambassador of Australia was presenting, are needed to contribute to strengthening adaptive capacity, and enhancing resilience to climate change. It calls for urgent, bold, and rapid measures to shift the continent to a trajectory that is compatible with the low-carbon, climate resilience, and sustainable future. What are the aspects of vulnerability and coping mechanisms in Zimbabwe? At the macro level of the impact of climate change in Zimbabwe, particularly rainfall variability and extreme weather events are expected to affect socio-economic sectors that are linked to the Sustainable Development Goal. So are we going to reach the SDGs by 2030? This is a big question. Vulnerability in Zimbabwe is closely related to existing development needs, especially among the poor population, who commonly lack the adaptive capacity to cope with additional stresses posed by climate change. We know that adaptive capacity is typically limited by poverty, natural disasters, environmental degradation, and reliance on rain-fed agriculture and climate-sensitive resources. This is according to a report of the UNFCCC. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me provide a brief overview on the few productive sectors of the Zimbabwean economy that are likely to be affected by climate change, with potentially significant costs. This is not an exhaustive list, but a few examples mostly focus on those sectors that relate to our work as the United Nations on agriculture, health, food and nutrition security, and livelihoods. On agriculture, the economy and livelihoods of the poor in Zimbabwe are highly vulnerable to climate change due to their heavy reliance on rain-fed agriculture. Agriculture accounts for 15 to 18% of Zimbabwe's GDP. Rising temperatures and increasing rainfall variability, notably drought, are also exacerbating declining agricultural inputs, further compromising economic growth and stability, food insecurity, demands for other goods, and poverty reductions. And the consequence of this is that the country will be more and more importing foods, and this is not good for the economy of Zimbabwe. According to the IPPC report, climate change is also leading to expansion of marginalized, rendering traditional agricultural system unsustainable. Even diversified livelihood systems with a livestock component are also becoming vulnerable. Mixed crop livestock systems are a traditional strategy for smallholder farmers in semi-arid rural areas. These systems tend to be well adapted to climatic conditions characterized by erratic rainfall patterns. If no adaptation measures are taken, yields from rain-fed agriculture are expected to continue dropping. Consequently, climate change is likely to exacerbate food insecurity, especially during prolonged drought events, which are becoming more frequent and intense. On water, estimates by experts indicate that Zimbabwe's water demand for outstream supply. Persistent drought in Zimbabwe severely affects and strains surface and groundwater systems, contributing to deteriorating water supply. Surface water is mostly from rivers and dams, as there are no large floodplains and swamps because of the semi-arid climate and topography of the country. Surface water is also prone to high losses due to evaporation caused by high temperatures. For example, in 2007, evaporation from high temperatures resulted in low water levels in most dams, which led to many of the dams to be decommissioned. This situation becomes worse than with climate change, where evaporation is projected to rise. This is projected to worsen the existing deficiency of water resources, especially in dry zones. At present, the majority of Zimbabwe's water, 80%, is used in the agricultural sector, followed by the urban industrial sector, 15%, rural authorities, 2%, conservation, 2%, and mining, 1%. So you can just imagine, if we are going to have less and less water, what will be the impact, not only on food security, but also on the economic activities. Energy. Less than 10% of the rural population in the sub-Saharan Africa has access to modern energy services, with just over 20% of the total population connected to electric power supply, according to the African Development Bank. As a result, energy provisions remains one of Africa's principal development challenges. Zimbabwe is not an exception. However, climate change is likely to compromise energy development, especially hydropower. Low water supply since 2007 and drought conditions created by climate change are expected to reduce runoff, further reducing the water levels required to support the operations of dams. On gender, climate change presents a significant threat to human security, especially for women who represent 70% of the world's population, of the world's poor population. It is widely recognized that climate change will worsen the gender dimension of vulnerability which arise from existing social inequalities. In addition to the disproportionate effects of disasters on women mortality and morbidity, climate change is expected to jeopardize women's livelihoods by reducing economic opportunities and access to employment. In Zimbabwe, 70% of women are smallholder farmers, depending on rain-fed agriculture and climate-sensitive resources. Women are therefore particularly vulnerable to climate change. How do we respond to these climate change challenges? An effective response to climate change should aim to achieve a more productive, resilient, and low emissions agriculture and allied sectors. However, a principal challenge facing adaptation projects in Zimbabwe is the uncertainty associated with climate variability. Most farmers in dry regions have experienced and are still experiencing multiple climate risk. There is also varying local perceptions and interpretations of climate variability, which can be broad and diverse within different social groups and communities. Additionally, lack of downscale climate data is particularly problematic in countries like Zimbabwe, where climate impacts and vulnerabilities are highly regionally differentiated. As a result, strengthening national and local capacities to manage climate risks, as they are currently understood, is imperative for dealing with climate risks in the future. The 2022 and 2026 Zimbabwe United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework that you found at the entrance articulates the strategic engagement of the United Nations country team in Zimbabwe to support the country to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. It encapsulates the shared commitment to leaving no one behind through delivering concrete results that ensure inclusive participation and reaching the people typically left the furthest behind. To leave no one behind, UN interventions are geared to pursue equitable, resilient, and inclusive growth delivered in partnership with strong, transparent, and accountable institutions where duty bears uphold human rights while strengthening governance mechanisms. Building the resilience of vulnerable populations requires helping people cope with change, adapt their livelihoods, improve governance systems, and build ecosystem health, so they are better prepared to respond to shocks and stress to which Zimbabwe is exposed to. The Zone this year is designed to deliver integrated support in 4 priority areas aligned to Sustainable Development Goals and National Development Strategies, NDS1. First, people-centered, inclusive, equitable human development and well-being, which is called people pillar. Secondly, environmental protection, climate resilience and natural resources management, planet pillar. Third, economic transformation, equitable and inclusive growth, prosperity pillar. And fourth, transformative, accountable, equitable and inclusive governance, peace pillar. Because there's nothing we can do, there's no domain without peace. The work on the planet pillar is particularly relevant to the topic of climate change that we are discussing today. FAO is currently reviewing its climate change strategy, and this strategy will focus on providing support to member countries in their climate action. It has identified some major priorities at national and regional level that will look into impact of climate change on food security and nutrition, and innovation, technological, social, policy, institutional and financial innovation that can be developed and scaled up at the country level. The new strategy will also enable FAO to work with partners and prioritize actions that will strengthen climate action at regional and national levels. A growing number of institutions, United Nations, NGOs, and research organizations, including civil societies organizations, are engaging in a variety of development projects, many of which have strong adaptation components. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change defines adaptation as the process through which societies increase their ability to cope with an uncertain future, which involves taking appropriate action and making adjustments and changes to reduce the negative impact of climate change. In this regard, it is also important to promote private sector participation and investment for climate adaptation and mitigation. Zimbabwe's Climate Smart Agriculture Investment Plan, adopted in 2019, makes the recommendation on climate smart agriculture investments, including investment in enhancing agricultural knowledge and innovation system, sustainable livelihoods through diversified livestock systems, water harvesting for resilient crop and livestock production, women and youth-focused value chain development, resilience commercial dairy farming. This should provide opportunities for the private sector to invest and create value. A common lesson learned is the importance of local context in developing adaptation strategies that build on local knowledge and cultural norms, practices, and value systems. Externally imposed adaptations may be discarded or ignored by communities. Participation methods, approaches are very useful in engaging communities and marginalized groups to identify diverse needs to as many adaptations options as possible and instill ownership of adaptation initiatives. In conclusion, what can we do as a country, as partners, to address issues related to climate change, including, among others? Reconceptualize participation in climate change projects as an instrument for empowering communities to influence policy making at all levels. Consider climate information in projects, including scientific data and local knowledge about trends and changes. Undertake participatory vulnerability and adaptation assessment at scale and across a variety of sectors. Share the results to foster learning between the private, public, government and civil society. Explore climate finance and other funding, including the GCF, GF, Adaptation Fund, etc., as real opportunities to fund good projects that reduce risk and bring benefit to the most vulnerable populations. Promote private sector participation in climate adaptation and mitigation initiatives. Develop climate awareness, raising campaigns aimed at government, especially decision makers, legislators and planners, etc., civil society, communities, and the general public. Adaptation is central for African countries, including Zimbabwe, Hence, there is a need to learn and exchange the best experiences, promote sharing of knowledge and solutions among different groups in our societies. Zimbabwe can leapfrog its socio-economic development trajectory by adapting climate-smart development strategy. In this regard, the private sector can play a critical role by adopting and expediting the migration of existing socio-economic sector to green economy. This is the new frontier of business for profit and sustainable development. As the UN, we look forward to engaging the business community through establishing a local compact for sustainable development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patrice Tala. We are about to get into an interactive session of today's breakfast. But before we go into that, I would like to acknowledge a new board member who just joined the DBMC, Mr. Kamal Kaufan. If we can just clap for him. I would also like to take this opportunity to make a brief announcement on a development that is coming through in May. We are going to be having an Expo, Business, Agriculture and Climate Change Expo conference, which will be held by the Southern African Development Initiators in partnership with the Diplomat Business Networking Council. The Southern African Development Initiators' vision is to be the leading facilitator in innovative transformation solutions for socio-economic initiatives in Southern Africa. In our presence, we have two members from the SADI, Blessing Jeke and Mrs. Moyo. Can we clap hands for them? At this point, I would like to introduce Ms. Busi Chindowe, who's going to be leading our session. Ms. Chindowe is Head of Corporate Affairs at Zimplats. Zimplats is well known for its sustainable mining, and they're a leader in the fight against climate change in the mining sector. The session that she will be leading will involve all the speakers that have spoken before: Ambassador Musoni, Ambassador Moss, Dr. Patrice Tala, and the GM for Wange, Mr. Blake Mativa. If I can welcome all of you to come through to the front, and then we proceed with the session.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, I think we all will agree that it's been a very interesting morning. Very inspiring in terms of the presentations that we have heard. And I think the common factor that has come through here is an acceptance that obviously this issue of climate change and the challenges that it brings are common and require a united stance in terms of addressing them. What I've picked up from all our presenters is really the wonderful policies that have been put together in terms of looking at issues of mitigation, adaptation, and value creation. But my question that I'm going to start by asking our panelists is, to what extent and in what manner have we ensured that business is involved? I think all of you have recognized the importance of business as a partner, but recognizing that importance has to then be practical. So my question is just going to say, from Rwanda's experience, what have you done to ensure that business participates so that these policies are translated into something that is practical? Also interested from the Australian experience and also from the UN experience, and then even from a more practical perspective, would like to hear from Wange's perspective in terms of how has this desire been translated into something practical. Perhaps if we can start off with hearing the Rwandan experience.
Thank you so much, moderator. You are right. Private sector involvement is very key. And the case of Rwanda, it's within our national development policies that most of the undertakings, government provides regulatory and the regulatory framework and the other incentives, but when it comes to the implementation, this is always the private sector. So, for example, on this one, I would say the adapted technologies, for example, in the construction industry, the green housing development programs, these are implemented by the private sector. Okay, even today, we're going to have the launch of one of the developed estates where they have been purely developed in the spirit of the adaptive technology in the construction industry. The same in the agriculture sector, irrigation, especially for small holders, small farmers. The government only provided a framework where these irrigation schemes can be implemented through private sector programs and many others. So I would say that most of the implementation part is done by the private sector, and the government consults private sector during design of these policies and adaptive programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Maybe if we can move on to Dr. Tabakam. I think one of the practical issues that you brought out was this issue of the local compact for sustainable development. You were looking at that as a solution to this link between policy and business. Could you perhaps elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you, Madam, for the question. Maybe I'll start by giving some principles. As we all know, the United Nations organizations are mostly intergovernmental organizations, which means that our first partners are usually the government, the countries. But I think over the years, we have realized that it's important in our work to have an impact in the countries to work with other stakeholders than the government. But we do that in collaboration with the government. That's why, as I said, the United Nations institutions and members, which are the countries, our main partners. But over the years, we have started diversifying our contact, our work in the countries by working with other stakeholders, including the private sector. Because we feel that to have an impact or to have concrete results in what we do in the countries, we need to have all these stakeholders together. That's why in my presentations, I also insist on the public-private partnership, because we think that the private sector needs to be brought on board in all what we do in the countries. And this is also one of the reasons that even in the negotiations and the formulation of the different instruments that we do, we always involve the civil society, and now we are also involving the private sector. And in most of our organizations, including FAO, we are currently formulating a strategy for the private sector. Because I think for a long time, the United Nations has been hesitating toward the private sector because of what is required as a due diligence, in fact, to avoid what we always call a conflict of interest. But we have realized now that the private sector is an important actor for whatever we do in the countries. So that's why, then I think that's why among the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, an important one is on partnership. And the partnership also includes the collaboration with the private sector. So regarding the compact that I was talking about, this means that we need to see how all the regulations, the rules and regulations, all the framework that are adopted at the country level are also including these actors at the private sector for the implementation. We all know that most of the policies that we adopt at the country level cannot be really implemented if we don't have the private sectors who are those investing at the local level. So we need to bring all of them involved. So that's why such a platform like the one that we have this morning is important for this to sensitize the different partners, including the private sector, for them to realize how important the role they can play for the society. So we cannot really realize this goal, this social demand goals, if we don't have the private sector involved, because they are the ones who have the funding, they are the ones who have the financing. And there is no development without the financing. And all sectors, including the social sectors and the economic sectors, we need to have the private sector with us. So this is the reason why we really insist that at country level, we need to have in place that strategy which really has helped to strengthen the public-private partnership at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tapukam. Maybe if we can move on to Ambassador Moores. I think it was very, very interesting to hear you talk about the mitigation strategies that you've put in and your adaptation strategies being very science and technology based. And I mean, working for business, one of the things that really interested me was the fact that you are recognizing the need to manage costs in all of this. So, the question really is to say, for this to be successful, there needs to be a very strong interface between government and business. And how has Australia achieved this?
Thank you. Yes, I think it's a really important question because, as we've all been saying, private sector is key. Private sector is absolutely key. And in an ideal world, we would want a private sector to, and I think most companies do, they do the right thing because it's good for humanity, it's good for their country. However, businesses have to make a profit, and we all know that. And I think on a topic like climate change, if we don't recognise that, it won't work. And that's why Australia's policy has been very much based on recognising the critical role of the private sector, recognising that businesses need to make a profit, and therefore for them to get completely on board, it has to be profitable, it has to create jobs, not lose jobs, it has to be based on marketing that can be scaled up in a profitable way. So that's why, linked to the science and technology point, it's a big emphasis of what we're doing. It's government investment in technology, in scientific research, that can help these businesses and these policies to be implemented in a way that don't cost jobs, that allow companies to profit, and then you get the win-win. And I think it's important also, it is done in that context, and obviously you need the input there, but then of course you can share the advantages of the technological results, which on a various scales, some quite small scale, we're trying to do exactly that, researching and working with counterpart scientists and technicians. And there are wonderful scientists and technicians all over the world, so we're learning from each other and then applying and scaling up. I think that's really important. I think linked to that too, though, is the reputational issue. You then get companies competing to be seen to be more green, and that's a really healthy thing. That's something that's profitable and good. And certainly some of the companies, the Australian companies that are looking to invest in Africa are some of our cutting-edge companies in terms of green hydrogen, for example, and green technology and clean energy. And we'd like to think that those who are competing for reputational reasons to promote that will be appealing then to the host governments to say, well, if you've got these options, then go to the company that's the most progressive on the climate front. So you create that healthy level of competition but very science and technology based. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My next question is to Mr. Matiba. Mr. Matiba, we have recognized the need for business to come to the party, to come on board. In your view, to what extent has Zimbabwean business come on board in terms of issues of climate change, the issues of mitigation, the issues of adaptation and value creation, and how can we do better?
Thank you very much. As you might be aware, probably I'm the dirtiest person here because Wange is the largest producer of coal in Zimbabwe. But it's like I'm caught between the earth's surface and the rock. I have livelihoods that depend on coal. And the production of coal in Zimbabwe is over 500,000 tons a month, which translates to over 6 million. And probably 30% of that goes into the atmosphere, which is quite significant. So, what we are doing as a company is to seriously consider climate change as a factor, as one of the highest risks we have in Zimbabwe, and particularly in the coal mining industry. So what are we doing to mitigate against that? There is value addition that is done by third parties. So what we are doing now is trying to develop technology. That technology is already there. It's just the implementation, which will be driven by Wange Colliery. So that when we emit into the atmosphere, we screen all the dangerous gases that cause negative, that are contributing to the climatic change. That's number one. Number two, when we mine, we leave huge open areas. Obviously, when we mine, we remove trees. So we rehabilitate those areas and plant trees in those areas so that we create carbon sinks, so that we reduce the carbon layer that increase the Earth's temperature. All the areas that we mine, yes, we have to rehabilitate them, but it's a cost. So my next point is, climatic change now has been accepted as a cost in the mining industry. So it's part of our annual budget. And even 5, 10, 15 years strategic planning is part of that. And then my fourth point is, it takes the whole company, including the board, if we have to be successful in any of our initiatives against climatic change. But the point that I want to raise as well is that it's not that just the board, but this also has to come from a perspective of the nation. Some of the decisions have to be made at national level and probably be made policy that all companies should implement as long as they emit into the atmosphere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've obviously said that it needs to become a strategic issue for business, and it needs to be an issue that is taken up at board level and aligned to government policy on these issues. Thank you very much. In the interest of time, we'll open the floor to 4 interventions from the floor. If anybody has any comment or questions to our panelists, please feel free to go ahead and ask. Yes, ma'am, in the red dress. Can someone please make a microphone available to her? If you could kindly identify yourself and then ask your question and make your comment.
Good morning, my name is Aluna Savanda, and my question is directed to Dr. Taukupam. as the representative of the United Nations in Zimbabwe and also the Food and Agricultural Organization. So the participation of Zimbabweans in the informal sector is very well documented, particularly in agriculture, right? And so one of my preoccupations when it comes to discussing climate change is that the language is very technical. And so when it comes to our engagement, particularly with smallholder farmers who are a big subsection of the beneficiaries of the United Nations, from a social protection and advocacy point of view, what are the steps that have been taken to not eliminate those to not alienate those beneficiaries, and also to make the language more accessible to them, particularly because they are very affected by climate change at the core of their work. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tobacco. Would you like to respond?
Thank you for this question, which is really, I think, is in the heart of my intervention earlier, social protection. I think you rightly said the local farmers, which are the most vulnerable and also the most affected by climate change in the rural areas. I'm sure you heard about Fungunza. Fungunza is a technique that FAO and the Minister of Agriculture has been promoting for the last 7 years in the rural areas. And Fungunza I think, is a local word for what we call climate smart agriculture or conservation agriculture. In fact, through Fungunza and the climate smart agriculture, we are teaching the farmers on the new techniques that are adapted to the climate change by using the local knowledge, the traditional knowledge, for example, to improve the yield and the productivity on the farmers. And we have seen in the region where we have implemented the Fungunza, how the productivity has really increased for those farmers. And this has an impact not only in the capacity in fact to have better production, but also in their livelihoods, because when the farmers are able to produce more, they can also access to the market and to sell those products and have better income. So this also, they can have impact on the education and health of the family. So I understand very well what you said. It might seem that the farmers might not be able to, in fact, to resist the shocks. But I think by implementing the Fungunza and the climate smart agriculture, we are able to provide solutions to those farmers. But we have also found that those who are really inclined to adapt in this Fungunza are most women. So that's why I was also insisting on the capacity to empower the women, because they are those who really on a daily basis are implementing those new techniques. Now the challenge of this technique is how do we scale up? Because we have done it in few regions, but we need now to scale up those new techniques in other regions. But we think that is also very important, because what we are doing is really at small scales. But this is where the private sector can also come in. And the private sector can come in through what we call the contract farming. The contract farming means that we put together the private sector who has the financial resources to work with farmers. And through the contract farming, the private sector can provide to the farmers the inputs for their activities. And the private sector can also ensure that the products of these farmers are sold, are taken by the private sector. This not only ensures that the farmers have their products taken and sold, but also it means that in the market we can have what is needed. I'm sure you all remember that during the COVID-19, at the peak of COVID-19, there was no food in the market. And these were the first consequences of the COVID-19, just because the farmers were not able to bring their product to the market. That's why we insist that the contract farming is really a tool, one of the ways, not only to improve the quality of life of the farmers, but it's also the way to make sure that we have products in the market and through the private sector. So I really insist on the role that the private sector can play really in this sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. We have two hands up at that table. If we could get another one.
My name is Rubimbo. I'm a consultant, a business management consultant. Mine is more of a comment and an appeal to the donor community on a change in approach. Business, the economy, or the entirety of existence is an ecosystem. And yes, agriculture really is key in our country, in Zimbabwe. But I think that having done studies on incentives and what makes economies change is definitely money. If money is flowing in a certain particular way, it can influence the behavior of an entire country. I think that when it comes to funding, it should not only be restricted to agriculture. We have mining sector that is being represented. We've got various sectors within the country as a whole. And these, if you look at what changes the behavior of any society, it usually starts from the communities or groups that are viewed as leaders. And if you look at, so what I'm saying is that urban dwellers, their behavior has a positive impact on the rural communities, and not the rural communities having an impact on urban dwellers. Within our urban communities, there's a lot of waste, a lot of climate, a lot of activities that is contributing to all of this climate challenges that we have. So my appeal would be, if you could consider funding or drawing or driving funding through two organizations that have clearly adopted some form of climate change activity. And so what do I mean? For example, we have an ESG score as a company, so we can actually score all the industries, whether you're in telecom or you are in whatever industry that you are. And that should be known to say this is the company, and in terms of their rating and how they're behaving towards climate change or even environmental, social governance issues, it should be clear. So, and once that is become clear, then funds should only flow to companies that are adapting to climate change or who are considering environmental issues. Those are the professionals that are sitting here. We are the people who have the influence when it comes to the less privileged communities, members of community. So that's just my contribution. To say when we look at Africa, how climate change issues are being addressed, it's starting with the vulnerable, going to the less, to the less privileged, or the ones that are literally not buying cars that are emitting all this carbon and doing investing in shortcuts. But if you look at the developed countries, it's starting with the urban communities and then influencing the other way. And that, I think, will delay the process. So my view is that let's start to influence the companies in the urban communities, and they educate their staff members, the staff members who go on to educate their families, and it will become easier for the whole African continent to start to embrace climate change behavior, less use of plastic, and so many other things. That's my contribution.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. My question goes to Her Excellency from Australia, Bronte. Sorry for putting you on the spot. Thanks for Australia's commitment to climate finance as stated in COP26 for the 80 million. But I want to first just maybe for you, especially for the private sector in Zimbabwe, because much of the initiatives that are coming to Zimbabwe is technical assistance, yet Zimbabwe needs physical projects and investments, which actually also includes feasibility studies. So maybe if you can also highlight the the pathways or opportunities the private sector can actually utilize so that they can have a piece of the cake, especially in Zimbabwe. Secondly, I think the Climate Institute's report here released about 2-3 days ago identified some top companies, which are not named, although of overstating their climate commitments. It's a which is actually greenwashing per se. I want to find out how Australia is actually doing and what the best practice that can actually be done. Because Zimbabwe has come up with a special instrument for all listed companies to have sustainability reporting. But I feel that that is a good step forward. We actually face the same thing that is also happening at a global scale. So I think just want to also hear some best practice on that. Thank you.
Thank you. You didn't tell us who you are.
Oh, sorry. My name is Diplomat with the United Nations Development Program.
Thank you. Your Excellency, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, in terms of the cooperation and the technical systems, I agree with you. We do need to have practical, on-the-ground investments as well, both through government-assisted programs and the private sector. We have been doing some of that. It's on a fairly small scale, but it's absolutely to demonstrate and to provide the practical expertise. One of the projects, again referring back to our scientific research centre and working with their counterparts, one of the projects over recent years in southern Africa, including in Zimbabwe, that's been incredibly successful, was a very practical program, irrigation program, based on a device which was Australian technology. It's now commercialised, more available, but it's basically a device that you can put into the soil and measure exactly how much water you need. So it's such a simple thing, but what it means is that you don't waste a drop of water. You know, and it's just for small-scale agriculture, so it's very much getting to the majority of the scale of farming, or much of the scale of the farming in this country. So basically this device, you know, you don't use a drop more or a drop less than you need. The consequence of that is much better water management, much higher yield, and all sorts of other spin-off benefits, frankly. So women are not, in these community projects that have been very successful, the women are not spending hours a day fetching water, plus they're managing the water. So that's an example of one very practical program that's been implemented on the ground, and to really try to have that demonstration effect. Because coming back to one of the other points that was made by somebody, I completely agree. People have to see that something works. There's no point lecturing people about climate change if you can't afford your next meal, obviously. You've got to make it work. People have got to see productivity and their family well-being increasing. So we've tried to do several things like that. We're continuing to try to do those on a small scale. In terms of the private sector, we have very active, all our embassies have very active discussions with Australian companies and really trying to promote best practice, to promote linkages into community development projects. You know, the companies are interested in their CSR objectives, we're interested in having connections into civil society in different ways. So we do try to maximise those complementarities, and I think there's more, and I hope there will be more we can do as more Australian companies come into Africa, bringing in that sort of expertise. So I hope we will see more of that. In terms of I guess holding the private sector to standards and monitoring, I think that's a really good question. We do have systems in place in Australia. They are quite strict, and a lot of them are based on our own domestic regulations initially. So that's where it springs from. So, you know, to operate successfully in Australia, we have very, and for a long time, very rigorous environmental standards, particularly in the mining sector, where we've learned over the years, sometimes from mistakes, I have to say. We have, our history is not necessarily impeccable if you go back several decades, but we have learned from the mistakes, from the community views, from the traditional owners' views, and I think we're in a very strong position now. We have very tough regulations and requirements. Now, when it comes to those being implemented overseas, ultimately, no national government can completely control what a country does overseas in certain countries. We certainly encourage it though, and certainly the reputational issues I think are very powerful. The shame and the reputational damage that's done if a company is seen to be disrespecting environmental standards of climate change is very powerful and becoming more powerful. And it will also, for that company, were that to happen, it has very detrimental impact back in Australia to their own, to meeting the regulatory requirements. So I think it's an ongoing challenge, and I think we all have to work at that, both in terms of the domestic standards that each country insists that countries comply by, and that's very much government policy related. But as I mentioned, I do think the reputational issues are very important too for the global operations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We said we'll take one last question. Is there anyone? Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, Moderator. My name is Tapaza Shirina from the International Labour Organization. My question is to you, His Excellency Ambassador James Musoni. You have shared the experience from Rwanda where Rwanda has been transitioning to greener economies, to a greener economy through the establishment of green cities. My question is, what has been the role of human capital development which has led to the transition of a greener economy? And what are the areas that you feel that you have seen as Zimbabwe need to improve with respect to human capital development so that we can also transition to a greener economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's it.
Thank you so much. The starting point, I think, is the buying the people to this issue, for people to understand that going forward, we need to change the way we've been doing business. We have to change towards the green growth and green development agenda. You think globally, now people are changing from these traditional sources of energy to green energy sources. Some countries have committed to elimination of non-green sources of electricity, for example, by a certain time. Others have committed to elimination of non-green sources of fuel and using, for example, electricity and others. So this kind of mindset, this kind of understanding, I think is the starting point, where people have to know that at a certain time, the traditional way of doing business has changed, and you have to adapt to new technologies and new ways of doing business, so that we can mitigate and adapt to these climatic change issues. So in Rwanda, that has been the starting point, to have that mindset change. We, for example, in Rwanda now, it's almost 10 years. We don't have these polythene papers and polythene bags. It has been a policy, and even people who are flying to Rwanda, they know that they can't come with these kind of polluting papers and bags. But private sector then came up with solution and provided those that are friendly to the environment, and it works. So when there's that kind of policy, and the policy is explained and involve all actors, and there's a buy-in, then the human capital issue follows, because those who are involved in human capital development, they also follow the trend. And when was Zimbabwe. I think Zimbabwe is well known, at least in Africa, as a country that has very developed human capital. So what we need to do now more is to make sure that there is that buy-in, that there is that policy shift where people have to understand that going forward, the future of this country and the future of the whole world is in the direction where everybody is an actor in the implementation of this global agenda for climate change as an issue for everybody. So if that buy-in and the policy framework is clear, then the human capital also flows. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that response. What remains is just for me on your behalf to thank our panel for making themselves available for this discussion. Your Excellencies, Ambassador Mills and Ambassador Msoni, also Dr. Tabukam and Mr. Mativa. Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions and comments that came from the floor.
My name is Grace Fulizan. I am CEO for Eaton House, an agricultural company that focuses on moringa and hemp. I am also chairperson of this partner, Multicultural Group, which is focusing on hemp. And I would like to mention at this point that the hemp we are talking about is industrial hemp. Realizing that the most important drivers for our economy are powered by fossil fuels, and these have become untenable, at least as far as the climate is concerned. We also noticed an opportunity to provide alternatives to fossil, make money in the process, create jobs, and so we focused on the cultivation of industrial hemp. The most important drivers of our economies are powered by fossil. This includes agriculture, aviation, mining, transport, energy, and other industries that are similar to these. The beauty of hemp is that it addresses directly, I think, what was identified as the biggest pollution problem this morning. I think one day is here, and they accepted that they are one of the biggest polluters in the country. But then one is tempted to say, so we are going to put the whole responsibility to clean up on you, but then we realize that they wouldn't pollute if you didn't need the product. So at the end of the day, we are all responsible, and the solutions must come from all of us. I think hemp represents the best solution for what we are faced with. Because when I look at what the experts in Glasgow said we must do, each and every one of those goals can be addressed using hemp, industrial hemp. We must keep fossil fuels in the soil where they belong. We do have a product that can replace coal. It's got similar calorific value as Multicultural Group. We intend to test it through curing tobacco. It is, we would be dreaming if we thought we could implement these new renewable strategies overnight. So we don't need one year to keep at it, to keep mining coal, and to keep powering us while we work on the alternatives. So the beauty of hemp is while the fossil industries are figuring out ways to clean their processes, to reskill their people, to change their business models, hemp will be absorbing the carbon that they are emitting. 1 hectare of hemp sequesters 22 tons of carbon in a season. The hemp we're talking about about is the one with non-THC, which basically means that it can be quite safely produced by even the desert farmer in the rural areas. What we have to fight for is for government to do regulate further so that, grandmothers in the rural areas can produce hemp. That would then mean that we are cultivating locally, valuating locally, selling locally, keeping the jobs local. It doesn't get any better than that. The second goal or task that we were given at Glasgow is to invest in renewable energy. You can make fuel out of hemp. Switch to sustainable transport, improve farming. There are other properties of hemp that are nutritional and pharmaceutical. Restore nature. Hemp is very good at putting carbon back into the soil, protect forests. It is as it grows, it will be an extension of the carbon sinks that already exist. And what I would like to say right now is we put the strategy in place. We've identified the science. We can take everybody along with us. Whether you pollute or you're just responsible in terms of climate, I think hemp is a safe bet for companies that wish to take their part towards addressing climate change. And some may argue that they are not polluting, but like I said, there is none of us that are not polluting, because the polluting companies are polluting in service of our needs. So I'm appealing to corporates to sponsor the production of hemp. If we are going to produce hemp to create a product that will replace coal in the curing of tobacco, in the running of boilers, as cooking fuel in the kitchen, it means we need a huge amount of hemp. It means every farmer in Zimbabwe can be working and make a profit out of it. We now need our corporates to sponsor the kick-starting of the hemp generation. And like I said, we have the science, we have the land, we have farmers that have already signed to say we are happy to do this. Government has already deregulated, and we are ready to roll. Those are conversations we can have after this meeting as to which way to go. But I think it will take gradual exit of fossil and gradual incoming of renewable energies, something that we can all work together and take responsibility for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. As we are about to close the session today, I would like to invite our board members that are here to come forward and assist us with the presentation of membership certificates to our new members. The board members that are free to come through to the front and help us to hand out the certificates. Before we do that, I just want to acknowledge Dr. Alex Gasasira, who representative, Mr. Abdullahi Berry, UNHCR representative, Mr. Jibrila Azind, UN Ops Country Manager and World Vision Country Manager, Mr. Asan Goala. I'd also like to acknowledge UNDP, UN Women, WFP, ILO delegates who are here present with us. So now I would like to hand over the certificate. We're all captains to the Corina of Morocco. Next up to receive a certificate is Jillian Munyangi. As highlighted before, our membership is both corporate and individual. Next up to come and collect the certificate is Gracious Makusha. If she's not in, we'll collect it on her behalf. Next up, exquisite jewelry manufacturers. Next up, we have Vunzi Jenna. Our next recipient, Talent Zima. Next up, Chengetai Joko. And then our last certificate for today is No Walls Media. To all those who have received the certificates today, welcome to the DBNC Club. We look forward to a fruitful and productive journey with you. I'd like to thank Ms. Anura Svanda for handing out the certificates. The next part of the session is I'd like to call upon our CEO, Mr. Reginald Chafunga, to come and present appreciation to our speakers. Mr. Chafunga, if you come to the front. Certificate of appreciation goes to Dr. Patrice Thaler. Next certificate of appreciation goes to Musisiwe Chindore. Our next certificate of appreciation goes to Her Excellency Ms. Broughton Woods. Next up is Mr. Blake Matiwa. Special recognition goes to His Excellency Mr. Hakan Kivanch, who's a friend of the Diplomat Appreciation Trust and outgoing ambassador for Turkey to Zimbabwe. Apologies, we have the certificate for the ambassador, the Rwandese ambassador to Zimbabwe, which will be handed out after the session. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our program, and I would like to thank all of you for attending, taking time out of your busy schedules to come through. Our activities are always backed by sponsors and partners and friends who I would like to acknowledge now as we close the session. Wange Colliery, Homelux, Champions Insurance, CABS, Zimbabwe Development Agency, Stanbic Bank, Avis Budget Group, Peace Security, Zimplatz, No Rules Media, Friends of the Environment, and ZB Bank. These guys are always awesome when we call upon them for anything, whether it's information, whether it's sponsorship, partnerships. Thank you very much to them. And thank you very much to all of you. Breakfast will be served from this end. And I would like to call upon all our speakers to go first and take their breakfast, then we can join in later. Thank you very much.